Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
The illegal deployment of the National Guard in our city do nothing to keep our young people safe.
President Trump's National Guard deployment in Illinois hits a legal roadblock.
Healthcare is a human right.
And the new leader of Planned Parenthood, Illinois, on the impact of federal threats on local reproductive care. First off tonight, claims of imminent danger facing immigration agents are not reliable. So says U.S. District Court Judge April Perry, who just moved to partially grant an emergency request to block the Trump administration from deploying National Guard troops in Illinois. Perry explained her decision from the bench and said she will issue a full written opinion tomorrow. The move is just the latest in a series of legal fights across the country. In September, a judge blocked deployments to Los Angeles, and earlier this week, another court halted deployments to Portland. Joining us to discuss more are Harold Krent, law professor at the Chicago-Kent College of Law, and via Zoom, Brandon Smith, partner at Holtzman Vogel, a national law firm that focuses on government, business, and advocacy. He's also former chief of staff to the Tennessee Attorney General and has worked for the governors of Kentucky and Kansas. Gentlemen, thanks to you both for joining us. So this is happening late. All of us are just getting this information about this ruling, partial ruling that we're getting from the federal judge, April Perry, today. Harold, first, what is your reaction to this temporary injunction in the National Guard deployment in Chicago?
I think it's a victory for the people of Chicago. I mean, the judge listened to the evidence, and this is really a factual question about whether there is an assault on federal troops on ICE in Chicago, or whether or not the ordinary law enforcement can protect federal buildings and federal instrumentalities. And she said that the evidence was unpersuasive, was kind of made up, that there's no showing that there's an inability of Chicago law enforcement to protect federal buildings and ICE. And until she sees that support, that there's no reason to federalize the troops, and there's no lawfulness in federalizing the troops. And so she made her opinion quite clear.
Brandon Smith, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, we were all just now reading the opinion from Judge Perry as it's coming out late this afternoon. But the reality is that for over 200 years, the United States Supreme Court and various courts of appeal have largely given discretion to the executive branch to determine when circumstances were sufficiently dangerous and justifying the use of the National Guard in this sort of deployment.
Brandon, so under the Title 10, Section 12406 of the U.S. Code, the president can deploy the National Guard in response to a foreign invasion, a rebellion, or to enforce federal laws. Judge Perry is, casting doubt on the Department of Homeland Security's assessment of protests in Chicago, arguing that they have not been severe enough to warrant Title 10 deployments. What do you make of that argument?
Well, it's an interesting approach that the judge is taking here, because she doesn't have much discretion to make that call on her own. In fact, under the constitutional structure, the president is operating at what would be called the apex of his executive or commander-in-chief authority. Judge Perry's decision largely seems to rest, as what we can tell so far, on her lack of seeing credibility in the claims that the situation on the ground is dangerous, but it's not her decision at the end of the day. The president has been invested with that authority under the Constitution and in statute, and that has been a precedent that's been upheld for hundreds of years. It's hard to see how this decision gets upheld when it's inevitably appealed.
Harold, to that point, the attorney for the Justice Department said in court today that the president is unreviewable.
Yeah, and of course, the president does have discretion. It's important to give deference to the president making a decision on the ground about what kind of danger there is. Is there a rebellion? Is there a lack of the ability of Chicago law enforcement to keep federal buildings and personnel safe? But it's not abdication. And what I think that the judge is saying is, even though I'm going to give a great deal of deference to the president, I'm not going to abdicate all responsibility. I'm going to look at the evidence, give deference, but make sure there's at least a core of credible evidence showing that there's a need to take this drastic step of federalization of the National Guard.
To what point then would conditions in Chicago have to devolve in order for Trump to legally justify the National Guard troops in the eyes of this judge potentially?
Well, I mean, part of the problem is that the president just a week ago was talking about law enforcement and how awful Chicago is, and so this is setting up a stage for the fact that this seems to be a subterfuge. It seems that the president is making up this information. So I think the judge was skeptical because of what the president had said before. And if there is credible evidence, we know about Broadview, but if it's worse than Broadview and it's systemic, then it's up to the government to present that evidence before her. And then I think she should defer to the president's judgment at that time. But as she said, evidence just simply isn't there yet.
Brandon, same question to you.
Yeah, I agree that the evidence is what's going to turn this case one direction or another. I just think that in this case, Judge Perry seems to be substituting her own judgment to not really grant discretion, but to find a pretextual reason to deny the government's decision to deploy National Guard troops in Chicago. There's clearly been issues in trying to enforce our nation's immigration laws in Chicago and elsewhere across the country. And the judges don't get to decide when that's enough for the president to use his lawful authority. The politics of it can be bad. The policy could be disagreeable, and we can always debate that. But the Constitution and the statutes here are pretty clear and clearly side with the president having this broad authority.
Brandon, in today's hearing, Judge Perry pressed a Trump attorney on the scope of the Guard deployment. The Trump attorney described Guard presence as a, quote, limited mission to protect federal agents and property, stopping short, though, of guaranteeing actions would remain within those boundaries. Is the Trump administration, are the Guard troops, are they required to agree to any set of boundaries?
That gets difficult to describe. The Guard has limits on what it could do in function and in practice, but so much of that depends on the circumstances on the ground. While they can protect federal property, federal agents from attack or assault, as we've seen occur over the recent weeks, they can also take on a role to enforce federal law, depending on what that looks like or what federal laws are being obfuscated or obstructed by local or state authorities.
Harold, President Trump has floated talks about the Insurrection Act. The administration was working on an appeal prior to Judge Perry's ruling. Is it likely that the Trump administration will try to incite the Insurrection Act, and under what grounds?
They can only cite the Insurrection Act if there's an insurrection, and that would give them another ground to base federal troops here again, and circumvent the whole restrictions on the Posse Comitatus Act, which is designed not to give the standing army to be in the streets of the city. And I think the same issue will happen. If he says there's an insurrection, we're going to look around and say, where's the insurrection? And there has to be at least some credible evidence. I mean, I agree with Brandon. There should be deference to the president. The Congress has delegated this responsibility to the president, but it's also the responsibility of the judge to look at the evidence, to make sure that's not sort of a just hashed together kind of subterfuge, but there really is at least some credible evidence that there's insurrection, and I doubt that there is at this point. There's nobody in the streets that are chanting, get rid of ICE or attacking ICE agents. There's no one trying to stymie any kind of general law enforcement here in Chicago. So in the absence of any kind of evidence that that's happening, then I think claims of it that there's an insurrection will fall flat.
Brandon, what is the likelihood that this is the act that gets invoked?
I think it's very likely, and I think it's very justifiable. Two things on the top here. One, the Posse Comitatus Act has a clear exception, which is the Insurrection Act and these other statutory authorities that we're talking about tonight. But two, we're not talking about like an armed military insurrection as being the necessary predicate for the president to act here. President Eisenhower used this same authority in the 50s to desegregate schools across the South. That authority is historically controversial to use, of course, but it doesn't have to rise to this sort of mythical military fictional view of an insurrection to get there. Local officials just refusing to enforce federal law is sufficient warrant under the Insurrection Act as well. And in fact, the judge's decision tonight could be even more proof of the problem that the president is trying to solve, that the traditional norms of executing justice and enforcing federal law are just impracticable at this point.
Brandon, Judge Perry, she also said in her ruling that the federal law permits the federalization of Guard troops in 3 instances, quote, not whenever the president determines when one of them is met. Should the court have given more deference in this case? And is that really what's at the core of this, right? Can the courts supersede the president?
I think the professor is right here as well. It is a level of discretion, and that is what we're debating. Now, as lawyers, we love having this conversation because it's academic and interesting, but it's also complicated. It's a hard decision for the judge to make, which is why for centuries, courts have said that judges shouldn't be making those decisions. Judges don't have the expertise to properly evaluate ground conditions in an ever-evolving situation to determine whether or not that's arisen to a level that the judge themselves finds sufficient to warrant this executive action. That discretion has been historically, is designed to be given to the president and has always been upheld to be primarily the president's discretion.
So, of course, we're waiting until tomorrow to get the full ruling from Judge Perry, but I think a lot of us have sort of like the gist of it right now. Harold, what's next, though?
Well, I just want to say one quick answer is that Congress has made conditions upon the use of these federalizations of troops. And it's up for the judge to determine whether the president properly followed Congress's direction. So it's not for the judge to say whether there's an insurrection, but it is for the judge to determine whether the president has made a credible finding that there is an insurrection, as opposed to just making a make-wake arguments. So that is a critical role that I hope that the judge and the Seventh Circuit, if there's an appeal, will continue to make. And we're likely to see an emergency appeal, to answer your question, very quickly the Seventh Circuit, just as what happened in Portland, and that was appealed to the Ninth Circuit. So that'll happen relatively soon, and we'll push this down the line. In the meantime, the troops will stay on taxpayer dollar here in beautiful Chicago.
Okay, more time in court for all of us, but that's it for the 3 of us for right now. Harold, Brent, Brandon Smith, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us on.
We're back with more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Also today, federal judges have handed down some other key decisions related to the Trump administration's actions in and around Chicago. U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis today granting a temporary restraining order against Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents using riot control weapons like tear gas, pepper spray, or less lethal bullets against reporters, protesters, and members of the clergy who do not pose an immediate threat. That ruling comes after the Chicago Headline Club, Block Club Chicago, and other organizations sued the Trump administration.
Now, we know in the state of Oregon that a Trump-appointed judge understood their assignment, that this is what the president is doing is illegal, unconstitutional, and dangerous. So I certainly hope that the Biden-appointed judge understands their assignment.
Meanwhile, National Guard troops are no longer expected at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse tomorrow, contradicting earlier reports that they would be deployed, despite the chief judge never requesting a military presence. For more on that story, please visit our website. And U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth says the Senate Armed Services Committee will hold a hearing in the next few weeks over the president's deployment of National Guard troops. She made the announcement today while slamming the Trump administration from the Senate floor.
It's obvious what Trump is doing. He's targeting and punishing the cities who dare push back against his abuse of power. And while he's currently targeting blue cities with his lies, if these deployments are not stopped, there will be nothing to stop him or any future president from doing this to anyone, anywhere, for any made-up reason that is also untethered to reality.
Her office says officials from the Department of Defense, which the administration has unofficially renamed the Department of War, will testify. City tourism officials say they don't anticipate any disruptions for runners or spectators over federal immigration activity at this weekend's Chicago Marathon. Rumors have been circulating on social media about potential ICE activity. That's left some runners questioning whether they need to carry a passport and spectators fearful about attending. Officials with the city's tourism agency Choose Chicago say carrying extra documentation is not necessary for runners. The 47th annual Chicago Marathon is expected to draw more than 1.8 million spectators, tens of thousands of runners from more than 100 countries. The race starts and ends in Grant Park on Sunday. Best of luck to those runners. And the Chicago Cubs are trying to keep their postseason alive. The Northsiders staved off elimination last night against the Milwaukee Brewers, who now lead the series 2-1. If the Cubs win tonight, they'll head back to Milwaukee Saturday for the decisive Game 5. Up next, one-on-one with a local leader in reproductive health care. Illinois is bracing for more patients after Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin paused abortions last week. And it comes as local clinics face potential Medicaid cuts from President Trump's spending bill. Organizations like Planned Parenthood of Illinois say they're preparing to meet that increased demand despite federal funding uncertainties. Joining us with more is Planned Parenthood of Illinois' new president and CEO, Adrienne White-Faines. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you've been on the job for about 5 minutes, 2 months. It's been an uncertain time, obviously, for reproductive rights, but also for your organization. It had been without a permanent leader for 7 months before you were appointed to the position. What is it like taking over at this current time?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare overall was already, for the last several years, in a state of change. And as we moved into 2025 under the new administration, many of the challenges in healthcare were exacerbated by changes in coverage, payment, eligibility, as well as research and levels of information. So I stepped in as a long-term health executive to Planned Parenthood under the auspices of a world in change. But it's been wonderful, and the reason that I'm there is because it's in Illinois. The commitment to reproductive health in the state of Illinois, from the policymakers through the delivery of clinical care and health systems, has always been phenomenal, with a commitment to the patients and to access. So that's the environment by which I look to rebuild.
Planned Parenthood Wisconsin pausing its abortion services just last week. You and other abortion service providers are expecting to see an increase in patients seeking abortion services. What have you all seen so far?
Yeah, just the announcement came within the past 10 days. This week alone, we've seen a doubling of the abortion cases that we usually receive from Wisconsin. In the meantime, we're working very closely with Planned Parenthood Wisconsin to make sure and help patients that need abortion care in our safe haven state. So that means aligning them with navigators that can help them with travel and gas expenses and food, as well as getting them to the care that they require.
And to be clear, a doubling of patients just from Wisconsin in the last 10 days.
Yes, yes. We received, actually, ever since the Dobbs decision in 2022, we had a 47% increase in the state of Illinois at Planned Parenthood in abortion care, people coming from 46 states. So we've learned how to build resilience and expansion to accommodate need. And we're going to be there for Wisconsin as well.
So to that point, Illinois, as you said, has been a haven for reproductive care, particularly abortion access nationally. The Guttmacher Institute showing that nearly 1 out of 4 out-of-state abortions in the country were in Illinois alone in 2024. About 35,000 out-of-state patients traveling to Illinois last year. That's accounting for 39% of all abortions in the state. What does this increase in demand mean for access to services?
Well, fortunately, Planned Parenthood recognizes that abortion care and reproductive services are an essential component of comprehensive health care. So we are designed to look at providing access to the full array of reproductive health services. So with our 13 clinics around the state, we utilize and flex our clinicians and our staff to make sure that we are able to accommodate. Where it becomes challenging, particularly challenging, is when you then also take away or alter the insurance payment and the payment structure so that we don't have the financial resources to be able to maintain that expansion. But right now we have the capacity and we are working to accommodate the Wisconsin and any state's needs.
Okay, so on the subject of insurance, because last month an appeals court allowed for the Trump administration to cut Medicaid reimbursements for abortion providers as part of the spending bill that passed in July that we all know of. A federal court today also just denying the government's request for a stay of that case due to the government shutdown. Over 40% of Planned Parenthood of Illinois patients, that's nearly 30,000 people, rely on Medicaid to access services. How do these cuts impact your patients? And to be clear, Medicaid never paid for abortion services.
Federal Medicaid does not pay for services. In the state of Illinois, Medicaid does actually cover abortion in this state as part of their legislative process and budgeting. But so it's to a lesser degree. But when you think about the Medicaid patients as 40% of our activities, our commitment is to continue, even with these fluctuations, to welcome and accommodate every patient regardless of their ability to pay. The challenge is on us as providers to make sure that we are filling every gap financially to meet that need. And I'm not going to tell you that it's easy, but we're committed to do it.
The status of that case, what can you tell us as it's still sort of working its way through the courts? What do you think will happen there? What's next?
I'm not optimistic. I think as we look at our challenges today and the stay, the way that the executive order was put in place was only for 1 year, but there's nothing that is telling us that it won't be extended. In addition, you have another change, H.R. 1, the bill that is going to change eligibility of Medicaid, coming in next year. So there's going to continue to be challenges, and we'll continue to work with the state, our donors, as well as our local delivery models to try to find solutions to long-term access to the care that teens, women, and all deserve.
That is a substantial financial loss, of course, for your organization. Can philanthropy and the state, how can you fill that gap?
It's a combination of finding the resources as well as appropriate operational alignment and efficiencies, and also looking at and making sure that you're leveraging delivery models and delivery systems like telehealth, digital health, others that are not as facility-based as they are. But these challenges of finding cost-effective health care are experienced not just by Planned Parenthood, but by everyone who has particularly populations of underserved patients.
All of that said, what is the path forward for your organization as you're, addressing these federal challenges?
The path forward is based on our history. And the reality is Planned Parenthood existed for 100 years. It has really turned the generation for women. It was in my lifetime that they actually allowed contraception to be available to all women. It cannot go away. Access to reproductive health care, evidence-based quality reproductive health care, is an essential part of health care that is deserving of all. So we have no choice but to find the solutions to ensure and protect everybody long into the future, and we will.
All right, Adrienne White-Faines, that's a good place to leave it. Brand new to the position of Planned Parenthood of Illinois President and CEO. I know it's been in your family line for a while, and you were on the board for a bit as well before taking the position. So best of luck to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And that is our show for this Thursday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm that gives back to the community through law and philanthropy.